Welcome to Performance Driven Living, the podcast where we question everything. We don't tiptoe around tough topics, we walk right into them. Not to provoke, but to get closer to what's real. You might not agree with everything you hear, and that's okay. The show isn't about being right, it's about being real. These conversations are meant to stretch your thinking, challenge assumptions, and spark something deeper. The views shared are those of our guests and may not reflect those of the host or team. And while we dive deep into health, performance, and transformation, this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor before making changes to your health or lifestyle. Take what lands, leave what doesn't. But whatever you do, don't stop questioning.
We are here at the Performance Driven Living Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Young, and I have the distinct privilege of introducing you all to my author friend, Sandy Martin. And Sandy Martin is a dear friend of mine, and she is a former Comic-Con event planner, organizer. You owned Comic-Cons all over the country. And then we always use this phrase that in your pain, you find your purpose. Sandy literally in her pain found her purpose. And after going through her own life circumstances that got her out of the Comic-Con world, ended up with, and I'm telling some of your story here for you, but more of a setup. And that is, you ended up with mold toxicity.
Yeah, that was my kryptonite.
Yeah, that was
mold.
the pain. Mold
Right.
brought you down.
Right.
You said you spent $100,000 plus
In the first year.
in the first
And
year.
counting.
Just trying to figure out what was going on. And I had mold issues at one point, and it was, I'll tell you, it was a serendipitous dinner that I happened to be out with to dinner with functional medicine doctor friends of mine who were clients at the time. And I was like, man, I'm just having this issue. Like, I'm just these respiratory issues and blah, blah, blah. And it was a husband and wife doctor team. And they both kind of looked at each other and they were like, mold. And I was like, I was blown away, completely blown away that they both just nailed it right there. And I was like, what do I do with that? And their answer was, everything you're doing is actually feeding the mold. They're like, you're taking antibiotics, you're doing all of this kind of stuff. Like, mold lives on antibiotics. It loves that. And it also destroys your gut biome, which is causing it to thrive even more. And they're like going through this whole thing. I'm like, oh my gosh. So, and I'll say I was one of the lucky ones who actually happened to know people who were able to identify this and put me on protocols to get rid of this, but it was horrible. But you, after spending so much money and so much of your life, truthfully, like years of your life trying to correct this, ended up finding purpose and ended up becoming like this queen of biohacking in this weird way where you jumped in and were like, my gosh, like, I solved my problem. And I always say the founder story for most of the companies that we talk to here in the biohacking spaces, and I always call it Mad Libs, because it's like, I once had a problem, it was blank. And I went to the doctor and no one could find a solution for my blank. And then I ran into blank, which made me start down a journey of learning. Like, it's a Mad Lib, right? I could write the founder story with Mad Libs.
Right.
And your Mad Lib is mold. Doctors couldn't solve it. All this problem, you ended up discovering frequency therapy. And then while you didn't come out with a product per se, you ended up running the Biohacking Expo down in Miami because you used your Comic-Con skills to bring biohackers together in an area where you used to live, which that's your superpower.
Yeah.
But now you've written a book on the topic.
Yeah, because after 2 years of running a biohacking event, Biohacker Expo gathered people who wanted solutions and companies that provided solutions. That was the goal, bring them all together.
Bring them together.
One of the reasons I spent so much money, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons is because when you're reading testimonials online and you're desperate, you're like, okay, all right, I'll try it. I was trying everything. And there are so many biohacking influencers and leaders in the space that are now getting paid gobs of money to hawk products. And I thought that they were just telling me what worked and they were being paid to promote. And that's what happens,
interesting.
especially if you've got a brain injury. I didn't have discernment. the mold went to the most active part of my brain. Just makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like the part of my brain
That's
that
where the most energy
made
is.
me, that was getting the most oxygen, just the mold was like, whoop. And so decision making, sequential thinking,
All executive
reading
function.
reading a spreadsheet, constructing sentences, like all of that faded away. And I was stuck. I would stand in my kitchen to make breakfast, and I just remember sometimes going, I would freeze for like a minute. Actually have no idea how long, but I would come to and go, what was I doing?
So I'm going to ask you a question because there's so many things I want to unpack with you, and I eventually want to get to your new book because I think that's amazing. But I want to start with you ended up with this cloudy thinking, couldn't make decisions, memory fail, so on and so forth. Now, I'm not going to ask specific questions, but I happen to know that you had gone through a divorce around that time.
No, the divorce came when I healed.
Oh, afterwards. Okay, so you actually were still married during this time.
Yeah.
So during this time, and I say this because women especially, I would say, when they start having some kind of symptom, if I can use symptom, although I hate symptoms, but like when women start to have things like this happen, they start to question themselves.
Well, I think that's common for everyone.
Okay.
I mean, if your brain starts to fail you, it's really, really hard to say something other than, I don't have it anymore.
Right.
Because our culture equates our ability to function with our esteem, right? My ability to have a conversation with you is what makes me me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm unable to carry a conversation and if I stumble through it, I'm going to beat myself up. And I think that's common for men and women.
That's fair.
But I would say on the if we're going to take a gendered look at it, I was 45 at the time, and all of my symptoms lined up with perimenopause symptoms.
Well, that's kind of where I was going with it being female, and I didn't want to get into an age disclosure.
It's okay. Look, we're biohackers. It's all right.
That's fair, right? But truthfully, it's like when women start to experience, if you're slipping and you're starting to notice memory loss, like you immediately go into this perimenopause mindset of, oh my God, it's starting. And the question that I really want to go into is like, I think we all limp a long time and don't even realize we're limping because the limp starts to feel normal.
Right. But that's inflammation.
I don't disagree with you.
It's a slow build of inflammation. And I have a very unique take on perimenopause and menopause because of what I've been through. Because it coincided with that period of time in my life, I didn't actually have symptoms of, I'm postmenopausal now, and I had no symptoms, no hot flashes, none of it. But at that transition point, because I had to get the mold out of my body, I brought my inflammation markers down. They're all in the normal range, which is extremely rare. And that's what causes the perimenopausal, menopausal, and postmenopausal symptoms is inflammation. And the reason why that transition period is an aggravating period for women is that fertility hormones make us superhuman. We're able to fight off famine and all of the stress of modern society. Our bodies are built to be able to withstand any amount of stress and pressure in order to birth. And so fertility hormones make us powerful. And then so we pile on more stress, more food, more seed oils, more all of these things that cause inflammation. And our bodies are like, bring it. We're here to make babies, right? That's the physiological hormonal balance is like,
That's still got evolutionary, right? Yeah.
And then when those hormones start to go away, but we've built up all of these bad habits.
Your hormones have suppressed that inflammation for so long, and when they're gone, they can't suppress it any longer.
Right. That's where the symptomology comes from. And so I get really aggravated with the industry for taking women who are essentially inflamed, putting a disease label on it, calling it perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, giving it a disease label so that they can prescribe hormones that cost a fortune.
I've never heard that explanation of menopause before.
I've heard it once. And I've been speaking this way for about 2 years and asking a bunch of my scientifically minded friends their opinions. They're like, yeah, that sounds right. And then I forget her name, but there was a woman on Diary of a CEO a couple months ago. And I was like, she
That's
just said what
interesting.
I've been saying.
I've never heard that explanation before, but I mean, I'm always looking for what are the gaps in that explanation, and that seems pretty watertight. Like that actually makes sense on a high level.
Yeah.
That hormones are actually suppressing. The same thing happens actually, and I spend a lot of time talking about cardiovascular health, and it's like the same thing happens with women when blood pressure ends up going up because estrogen production is a natural vasodilator. And when estrogen production goes down, the cardiovascular system doesn't expand and contract the way that it used to. Blood pressure goes up, and it's like, oh, menopause causes high blood pressure.
Nope.
That's not what's happening at all.
That's right.
You just don't have the input you used to have.
Right.
And when the input goes away, you need to deal with the input differently.
This is a very normal, predictable phase of a woman's life cycle. It's not a defect.
Right, and it shouldn't be a surprise.
Right. Our bodies aren't broken because we go through this transition. We experience pain in this transition because of what we've done to our bodies leading up to it.
Well, but no different than the way I treat my car when I go over 100,000 miles is different than I did when I treated my car when it was new. It requires a little bit extra input. And it's like, my belief is that health is health. And at any age, healthy is healthy. There is no, I think we have a tendency to expect deterioration with age. And my expectation is there's no reason to deteriorate with age. We just need to change the inputs. Like there's
But it's a financial reality
for many people
that they want us to believe that that's normal, because then that's how they medicate us. That's how they get us on these protocols.
But even people who aren't even medicated, like we just expect that everything should hurt as we age. And it's like,
it's ridiculous.
But that's a terrible mindset, because you're inviting more of that into your life just with that mindset, which is what drives me crazy. But I want to go back to that other earlier question though, because the question I had was that what was going on in your head, not the mold, because that was in your head too, but what was going on psychologically when you started noticing this, I'll say early dementia type symptoms? Like you're dealing with this, because I know people in my own life who are dealing with this. Like the words are gone, and my short-term memory is a mess, and I walk out the door and I always have to go back because I forgot something. And I don't want to use that as they've got mold. Like, but what was going on in your head? Because I watch the emotions that go on, and I'll say my stepmother is always worried about her memory and her cognitive function. And it's a very emotional place for her, because she's like, as soon as that starts to happen, like she almost goes manic thinking about the thought of losing her mind. Right. And it's like my grandmother she's 85 and she's got, some cognitive decline, and you can't get her to do anything to behaviorally adjust it. But it's like, but the minute she can't come up with a word, it's as if there's this paragraph she's memorized that every time she's like, what was I just about to say? Oh, honey, you don't understand. My memory is not what it used to be. And I struggle with this all the time, and it scares me. And she goes into this whole disclaimer, and I'm like, okay, like I get it. Like there's things we can do about that, but it's almost like psychologically she feels the need to explain herself because this is embarrassing. Like, what was going on in your head when suddenly, like, a woman who's super sharp like you, who's running complex systems and organizations and everything. I mean, you're running Comic-Con conferences, which anybody who's ever hosted an event the size of one of those things knows the logistics of that is incredibly intellectually demanding.
And I could hold it all in my head.
And then all of a sudden you can't remember what you walked to the kitchen for.
Right.
That's scary.
It's terrifying. And I was burnt out. And I had pushed myself to a level where I knew that I could have slippages. It was not out of the question that I had just pushed my brain too far, because I was working so hard and thriving. But there's this fine line, And there's this thing called burnout. And that was what I first thought it was. Oh, I must have fried my brain by thinking too much. But then the depression started to sink in.
Yes.
And I'm grateful for all of the work I've done in my life to know myself. And I just had this quiet knowing, this isn't me. It's not I who am depressed. I am not depressed. I've realized I was having symptoms of depression. And
I want to pause you right there, because you made such a delineation there that I appreciate. And that is, you didn't use I am statements
Right.
to define your circumstances, because that's a neurological trigger. And when we use words like I am, we literally at a cellular level are defining the way that our body behaves from that moment forward. And I hear this out of people. I am diabetic. I am obese. I am all of this type of stuff. And I am is an identity statement.
Right.
And I appreciate the fact that you made that distinction there, because whether or not you were having symptoms of something or not, you never claimed it as an identity.
Right. And so I started to explore how it could be that I could have symptoms of depression while loving my life.
Ugh.
And that was my curiosity that carried me through the next few weeks. Meanwhile, my cognition is continuing to slip. And I went to YouTube and I watched videos on the brain and people who were smart about the brain. Dr. Daniel Amen, Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, Dr. Mark Hyman. This is when I learned the term functional medicine. I had never heard it before. This was October of 2020.
How interesting. So you were in lockdown anyway, so you had nothing better to do but watch YouTube.
Right.
And
Well,
here's
I was,
the deal.
but it's not the month prior. I had converted a whole system of. We had lost $400,000 by refunding tickets for
To
a
a
Comic-Con that we had to
because you were in
cancel.
lockdown, yeah.
Right, and then rebuilt that business in a virtual space. We were on track to quadruple our revenue for the year. We had a bigger year in virtual than we had in lives, but we thought we were about to go under. And so I orchestrated all of that. I built the infrastructure for that. I was working 80-hour weeks in September, and in October, I couldn't put together a sentence.
Wow.
And it was so abrupt. That's also how I knew, right? Because it was so clearly not, I either fried a circuit or it was something.
Well, and during the time of the pandemic, because you said that was in 2020, you had to be concerned that this could have even been COVID related.
I was, but I had been thriving up through September.
Right.
And I had not been sick since I had the flu in March, and it was diagnosed flu. And I had not been diagnosed with anything mysterious. And so it was a question, but I didn't have any evidence of that at all.
Sure, but I think everybody during that time just had a giant question mark over their head, because if I stubbed my toe and it hurt more than normal, I was worried that something was going on, right? So, I mean, I can understand that there was just a lot of confusion around healthcare in
Total
general
confusion.
in 2020. And now all of a sudden, people are talking about, COVID and cloudy brain and long COVID and all these other types of conversations are coming up. Mold, where in the world would that have even have entered the conversation? Because there were so many confounding variables that could have been,
right,
that the idea of mold was like a needle in a haystack type diagnosis, really.
And if it wasn't for Dave Asprey, I wouldn't know.
I
finally stumbled on his content about 6 months into my exploration of what could possibly be wrong with me. And he had trouble with mold, and he explained his symptoms. Now, I had a SPECT scan done. I was too afraid to get on a plane because I wasn't a biohacker yet. I didn't fly to Atlanta to go to Dr. Amen's clinic. I went to a clinic in town that could do a SPECT scan to get a similar examination done. But they did it wrong. It matters who you see.
Yes.
And it wasn't until a few months later that I took Dr. Amen's brain coaching certification course that I learned how to read my own scans. And then I learned that they were performed incorrectly. I learned that the way they performed my scans made it look like I had a traumatic bump to the head, a traumatic brain injury from front to back. I was diagnosed with a TBI by a neurologist 4 weeks after I got sick. And then he tried to give me a drug called nimodipine that's for stroke victims to open up the blood vessels in the brain. And
Which
so
actually would have made the mold worse.
it might have. I don't know. I had never even considered that. But I was about to take it. I was sitting in the CVS parking lot. And I called my husband and I said, I'm not going to fill this. And he said, you have to. You're sick. And I said, I'm not going to do it. And he said, but the doctor says this will help you and you can't function. And I said, I'm just not going to do it. He took me back to the doctor. They both ganged up on me. They insisted I had to take it. And I just said no.
And this is where biohacking starts with no. I love that. So Sandy, I want to get into the Biohacking Starts With No, which is the title of your new book, but I want to make a quick stop along the way there. And that is your journey through your mold recovery. And I don't want to focus the conversation how you cured mold, for instance, but which amazing through frequency, through sound therapy, like very unconventional means that you've used to actually, cure this infestation, if you will.
Yeah.
And I know you be as clear-minded as you can imagine, but through all of that, you started hosting biohacking conferences. But one of the things I know about you, just having known you for quite a while, is this idea that you don't host biohacking conferences and just let anybody into the party. And what I enjoy about that is that there tends to be, you said earlier that, all these influencers are just getting paid to say things and paid to do things. And it's like, and sometimes the industry of, I'll say biohacking, but functional medicine, longevity, whatever we want to call it, gets very much labeled as this snake oil type industry, right? Because people don't understand it. And doctors are telling you, you must take this. And you're like, no.
Right.
And then the problem is you say no to conventional wisdom. And then it's as if you pivot all of your attention into this wild, wild west of solutions where an alternative solution to what the doctor told you isn't clear at all.
Especially because we're not allowed to say what our products can do if they are not FDA approved.
Right. An amazing point.
And even if they are FDA cleared, like
Still
light
can't say
therapy,
it.
you can't make a claim. So the FDA can review a bunch of things and say, oh, this is safe for use.
Right.
And there's a ton of that in the market.
FDA clearance, just because that's an area of expertise for me, is literally just saying the FDA has cleared you, saying this probably isn't going to kill you.
Exactly.
But they're not saying it does anything good. They're just
That's
saying
right.
that they've at least looked at it and decided it's not lethal.
Right.
And which again is good, I suppose. But people lean on that FDA clearance. And the problem is companies, predatory companies especially, lean on that FDA clearance and hope that the general public believes that the word clear means approved. And most people in the general public don't know the difference between what an FDA clearance and an FDA approval means. And most people also don't understand that an FDA approval only means a marketing claim. Like, that doesn't mean the FDA is endorsing it. That means the FDA is actually saying that whatever marketing moniker that you applied for, they agree that it does that.
And the studies take millions to perform.
Millions.
But on top of that, you have to pay off the FDA more than $1 million in order for them to review the studies. So it costs money for them to review it too.
I was going to say, I wouldn't say it's more than $1 million, only because I've done that route. So it's not a paying off the FDA. I don't want anyone to get the idea that the FDA is taking bribes.
Are they not?
Yeah, your words. I'm friendly with the FDA. So
Okay.
what I will say is
I'm not
that,
friendly with the FDA,
yeah,
and I'm okay
I'm friendly
with
with the FDA. I actually have a current clinical trial that's underway with the FDA right now. And I will say that as much as I hate bureaucracy, they've been good to me.
Okay.
So I can't even complain. And again, I hate the bureaucracy, but the FDA has actually been very, very kind to me. So I won't say anything negative, albeit I hate bureaucracy. I do believe the people on the other end, by and large, are really trying to protect the public from the snake oil companies. My problem is that pharma's already through the gate.
Right.
Like the FDA has approved all of this stuff that for whatever the culture was that allowed all of this to happen. And we're in a new world right now. It's an entirely different thing. You were with me. We were having dinner with Callie Means the other night, having this conversation. And it's like, so we've got all these snake oil companies though, is where I want to go. And your conventions, your conferences, you only invited the right people to the party. And there is this idea that
A couple of people snuck through that I didn't know.
But
I
I
don't want to claim to be perfect here, but I made a great effort to curate the room for sure.
correct. And one of the ways that you actually said that to me at a conference that I was at of yours was that the entire room was a referral from someone else who was in the room. That only companies that recommended other companies were able to attend an event. This was not just a pay to play, fill the room. This was we want the best. And sometimes the best is not the biggest. Sometimes the best company to be in the room is the one who's still struggling, but they actually have the best science, right? They just haven't figured out a marketing message, or they just haven't gotten funding, or people just, it's too hard of a story to explain, right? But all of that stuff happens. But I appreciate about you that I would say that even your conferences start with no.
Well, I had someone try to pay me very early on to get on stage, and I would not let him speak at all.
Right. But that's integrity.
And that was 10 times what I was asking for a booth. And I just kept saying no. So I'll let you set up, but I'm not going to let you speak, because what you're saying to the public on social media is so egregiously inflammatory and wrong that, like, he put on social media that they put plants on the space shuttle to keep the astronauts breathing clean air. There are no plants on the space shuttle. It's just ridiculous.
There's algae.
There are no plants on the shuttle. And sure, there are some plants on the space station, but they're not decorating the space station with
plants.
Mother-in-law tongue.
That's
what
amazing.
Is that?
Yeah, mother-in-law's tongue.
Yeah,
but I happen to know, like,
happen.
even at your first conference, like Gary Brecka stepped in to be your headline speaker and didn't even get paid to do the event.
Right.
Like, this is literally like you were, and I mean, Gary Brecka.
That was a trade. We did a trade.
But nevertheless, like, these people of integrity do business with people of integrity.
That was also before he was very famous.
You don't need to disclaim. Like,
I think he would appreciate it if I did.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is like Gary stepped in and was like, yeah, I see what you're doing. I see your vision. I get this. And we'll do whatever to, whatever, as he started growing his career as well. But nevertheless, the point of the matter is that you've written a book called Biohacking Starts With No. And I'm actually drawing that this has been a theme through your life. This isn't just a book title. This is you said no when they tried to give you pills to solve your problem. And you're like, no, there's a better way. And then you said no multiple times along that journey when you came across, I would say shoddy goods that promised that they were going to be able to help you. You've said no to vendors and speakers who wanted to be part of your events. And you were like, no, I want to curate the best outcomes for people who are attending these events, which has led you now to a book that says no.
Right.
Like,
now, I will say that, and the reason why the book is a rant for me and a cathartic expression about this industry, and why I say I'm pulling back the curtain, it's not that there's so much snake oil in the room, but it's also not a panacea. And so the problem with the industry is that even though some things are excellent therapies, I bought a hard shell hyperbaric oxygen chamber in that $97,000 in that first period of time before I found out what was wrong with me. That was $27,500. And oxygen therapy is unequivocally excellent and not snake oil.
100%.
But if you've got mold in your brain,
it's the worst.
That will cause you headaches, and it will not fix the problem.
Well, yes. And
so we have to say no to the idea that there's any sort of fix that can be applied to quickly shift. Our bodies are built to live 120 years. That's in our DNA. And our life expectancy is 77. And so we can talk about getting beyond 180 all we want, But let's
Yeah.
focus on getting this hardware aligned to 120 before we start adding these therapies on to get beyond that.
Well, and the other thing I would say is that, and I love how you said that, but the idea that when you walk a showroom, for instance, here at the Dave Asprey conference, I will say that everybody loves their product or their invention or their formula.
Mhm.
And I always use the phrase that if all I have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Mhm.
And if this is the solution that I'm able to sell, then of course I tell you that it's going to help with yours because it may. And there's a lot of anecdotal support out there for things helping because we end up confusing correlation with causation. And your product may have helped because I was doing 3 other things and maybe it worked in tandem with something else. But
Also, antidotes are the only viable expression of these product benefits because of the FDA restrictions. And so a person can tell their story
Mhm.
about their personal experience with a product, and that's legal. I can talk about my
To an
own
extent.
personal experience. You can't promote my own,
Correct.
right? But
Correct.
I can talk about it. So what happens in conferences like Dave's and mine is that people get in a room and they share their experiences. And so you gather people around a booth and someone will say, "Oh yeah, I use this."
Yeah.
And then that conversation starts.
Right.
And that creates this groundswell of interest that supersedes anything that can be said online, on a website, on social media. And so that's what's great. The anecdotes are helpful, but they're not
But they're
scientific.
inconclusive.
And everything about what we do is inconclusive. And it all sounds wishy-washy. Even the
Well-
ones with great studies, like your product has great studies behind it, you can still only give a vague statement about your
the
product.
clinical claims you just can't make. But
Here's the story. Let me just,
Yeah, please.
when I did my first photobiomodulation helmet from V-Light, my mom said to me, she said, "If that works, why don't we know about it? Why doesn't everybody know about it?"
Oh, if I've heard that once, I've heard it 100 times.
And I didn't know what to say to her 2 years ago. But now I know to say the FDA won't let them say what their product does. That's why we don't know.
Well, and the other thing too is that I'll say it's 2 things I want to say to that. And the one is, as you said, there is no magic pill that fixes everything. It's very much, I always use it's like pulling the handle on a slot machine with 9 wheels and hoping they all come up cherries, right?
Yeah.
You can do 2 things that are great and still not see the result because there's still 3 other underlying things. And it turns a patient into a detective having to go figure this out. And that's where functional practitioners really stand in the gap, I think. And, I mean, I have a general practitioner that I talk to who's an MD, but it's like, I have a functional practitioner that I talk to on a regular too, because it's my responsibility to make sure my heavy metals aren't out of balance and my minerals are in balance and my everything's functioning about me correctly. And there's 100 things at minimum.
But I spent 20 grand on functional tests
Right.
with
That still didn't ferret out the problem.
right. The first functional medicine doctor I had to spend $5,000 with, she performed a methylation analysis that didn't do me any good. There was no basis for that helping me at all in her recommendations. She just performed the test. I don't even know how to read it. Then she prescribed the drug nystatin that caused me to have suicidal thoughts for the only 4 days of my life. And so if you go hard after mold, it fights back. It
Yeah.
doesn't care if you're alive or dead. It lives off of us, alive or dead. It doesn't care. And so if it's threatened, it enacts revenge.
Yeah. And to that point, like methylation tests are great. Gary Brecker would, of course, recommend them. But
you got to be able to read them.
But they're not for that. Like methylation tests not going to tell you have mold. It's going to give you a lot of other great data, but
I went to her for a $400 mycotoxin test, and she insisted I also spend $5,000 for the methylation test.
Yeah,
that's just taking advantage.
That was a bad doctor.
And then the next doctor was $13,000 to take another mold test and other genetic tests. He refused to tell me what my genetics even said. It was such a long report, I couldn't read it. I didn't understand it. And so it's test after test after test. And I joined the functional medicine practitioner Facebook group.
Mm-hmm.
And if you should join the group, because if you went into that group, you would never see a functional medicine doctor. The nonsense that they are arguing about back and forth, because there's no standard in functional medicine. It's such a buzzword. I even heard at the dinner the other night, the MAHA action team, they're all about functional medicine and creating standards around it. And they need standards because there is no standard for getting someone affordably through a process to understanding their health.
Well, and that was actually where I was going to go next, is this. I want you to talk about what the book means to you, because you said it's a rant and a catharsis, which I believe. Like you had a terrible journey to get to where you are right now, and there probably is a lot of war stories along the way. You were blessed in order to be able to. You keep throwing out these dollar amounts, and I think to some people, like those dollar amounts aren't even relatable.
Right.
Because they're like, where in the world would I get $97,000 to go do this, right? Like you were fortunate enough to have the financial wherewithal to do the things that you did.
Yeah.
Most people just deal with the mold.
Right.
And they never get diagnosed and they never go search for an answer. So even the people who have the intellectual curiosity to look can't cross, there's a barrier to entry.
But none of that money went towards getting rid of the mold.
Well, agreed. But it helped you look in a lot of places that a lot of other people, you at least looked a lot of places and found what it wasn't. Other people wouldn't have even been able to do that.
Right.
Like they literally, the doctor said this, and one of the comments you talked about, if this was so good, why would anybody not know about it already? With Zona specifically, which you're familiar with my involvement with that company, one of the comments we get most often is that, well, if this really works, why doesn't insurance cover it? Because there's a belief in the average American's mind that the insurance companies cover everything that's good. And it's like,
that's what they want you to
but
believe.
the insurance companies are in bed with the pharma companies and all this other kind of stuff. And it's like, and functional medicine requires that we actually take an active and financial role in our own healthcare. And we're not talking about healthcare. Like I can't tell you, the last time I thought about what a copay would be on something, because I don't think of my health in copays. I think of my health in what do I need. And
I took out a catastrophic plan. I don't need a copay. I'm not going to see a GP.
Correct. And that's, I'm
don't
on my
need that
company's
benefit.
healthcare policy because we provide that for all of our staff. But nevertheless, like I agree with you. Like I had a new staff member come in and talk to me one day because he just saw the supplement lineup that's all over my desk. And he's like, what exactly do you take? I need to start doing this. And, and literally I was like, well, I actually have a list, like here's this and so on. And he's like, well, what should I take? I'm like, I don't know your physiology, so I can't give you that recommendation because everybody should take something different, depend on what your current health levels are.
Right.
And so I made some recommendations to him, and he came in back in my office a couple days later, and he goes, I went and checked all this out. And he goes, this is a car payment. I'm like, well, car payment's what I recommended to you. Like, it's probably 2 or 3 car payments that I actually spend. And I'm like, but it's not because I'm looking at what's my copay on my prescription or what's my copay on my office visit. Like, I just know I'm going to have to afford to do this stuff, and I prioritize my health enough to do that. But I'm very blessed to be able to be in that position, as are you. What do you recommend to people who aren't?
That's why I wrote the book, because you don't have to spend the money to get healthy. If you really want to know what's wrong with you, you can pay for the tests. But you can get healthy without knowing. And I know that sounds nuts, but the doctors don't know either. I mean, they use labels like autoimmune,
Right, which means I don't
fibromyalgia,
understand what it is.
chronic fatigue. These are labels that are given to conditions that have no known root cause.
I have a sister who is like the autoimmune queen. Like she's convinced that, she has vitiligo, and because she has vitiligo, the doctor told her that that's an autoimmune, which means you're probably just susceptible to a lot of other autoimmunes. And now she's got Hashimoto's and like and she's like, it's just the autoimmunes. I get them all. And I'm like, that's not normal. That just means they haven't
just the inflammation.
They haven't found the root cause of things. And I introduced her to Amy Horniman. And Amy? Amy's an amazing thyroid doctor and whatnot. I'm like, chat thread them. I'm like, Amy, this is my sister, blah, blah, blah. And Amy, I talked to her when we were at the CHS conference. And Amy's like, I've been talking to her. She's like, but she has this mindset of, thank you for the advice. I'll go check with my doctor.
Yeah. I had this same conversation with my cousin on Monday, and she's got a gut issue, and I helped her dad fix his gut issue. He was sitting on one side of me and she was on the other. And I said, you've got to fix this. And she said, well, what would you do? I said, take what your dad took. It helped him. And then so we talked through it, and she said, well, should I run that by my doctor? And I said, I don't know, run it by your dad, who just completely healed based on my advice.
Well, and
Like, you can run it by a doctor who doesn't know anything about this, or you can just do what your dad did. Did you see how healthy he got?
Well, and what's funny is like Amy's response, and I'm not going to put words in Amy's mouth, but it was kind of like, I'm going to run this by my doctor. And she looked at me, and I'm like, and the look on her face was almost like, well, I'm a doctor too.
Right.
So there's that. But there's also, you're going to go ask the person who can't fix your problem if the solution that someone else is recommending will fix your problem. Like the same person who's telling you there's no fix for your problem is the one you're going to go vet all the other stuff through. Like you're asking the wrong person.
Well, I like to explain to people what the issue is with their doctors. They're not allowed to think for themselves anymore.
And they're not trained.
They're not,
like,
but
not
it's
for
not,
that.
it's not that. They're deliberately kept in the dark. They're deliberately pushed into a model that is safe from malpractice lawsuits.
Correct. Standard of care.
And so that standard of care, they even will, in a building full of neurologists, because I experienced this with my dad when I had to take him to get he had strop foot. And we got that checked out, diagnosed. They sent him to a Parkinson's guy first because he has an essential tremor, but not Parkinson's. They sent him to a guy for Parkinson's for his feet not being able to lift. It's the craziest thing. And so that guy was like, I'm a Parkinson's doctor. I can order the test for you, but I can't evaluate it for you. You're going to have to see my colleague down the hall. In a building full of neurologists, they divide them into specialties so that they can cover their asses.
Right, not get sued.
Right.
And if I were a doctor, I would probably be worried about our litigious society as well.
And so they're not allowed to recommend a nutrition or lifestyle when a drug is approved. Like, imagine if someone doesn't prescribe an SSRI, doesn't prescribe Prozac.
And then a person commits suicide.
That's exactly where I'm going.
Yep, totally understood.
They have to protect themselves. And so they're locked in a system where if they deviate, I went in 2018 to get a standard annual series of tests done, and I asked for C-reactive protein to be tested, and my doctor told me no. And I was like, but it's a common test. And
why can't I measure my inflammation levels?
Right. And his answer, I asked that question, his answer was, we can't do anything about inflammation levels, so why would we test for it? Right.
We can't do anything about inflammation levels. See,
right.
That's the handicap
He's locked
of the
in a
medical
model.
industry. Well, Sandy, let me ask you, so someone who's interested in looking at your book, okay, obviously we're going to tell them how to find you. Biohacking Starts With No, that's NO .com.
That's right.
Is that correct? So biohackingstartswithno.com is a place to find out more about you as well as that book. But what would be your advice from a veteran of self-diagnosis, and then you're a force here in the biohacking space out of nowhere, which is kind of funny. It feels like you went from 0 to 60 in no time flat.
That's how I go.
Seriously. Well, you went from never hearing the word to sitting at benefit dinners. Yeah. What would you tell somebody? Because you're saying you don't have to spend this $100,000 and so on. Where would people start if they're just trying to take that first step on a health journey?
I mean, I think sleep is the most important start.
The answer I always give.
Right. But the problem with that is that there are so many things that make it challenging to sleep that it's like peeling an onion. I want to give an example of my cousin. He was the motivating factor for me writing the book. My story started with that drug refusal. But when my cousin called me one day and said, Sandy, what do you think about lion's mane? And I was like, why are you asking me this? And he said, well, I'm having a little brain fog, and I hear that people say it can help with that. And I said, sure, but it's not going to do any good for you if you're still eating at McDonald's. So you got to stop eating at McDonald's. And he really woke him up. And then he proceeded to text me for the next 3 days with, can I do this? Can I do that? And then I steered him towards a mostly carnivore for a limited time diet, but all keto. And he dropped 16 pounds in 2 weeks, felt better, started hiking challenging trails, which he'd never done in his life. Like, it opened up a desire for him to live his life in a more whole way, holistic way. And that's the essence of this, is what are you putting in your body that's slowing it down? You know, my cousin had a vegetable oil based butter on the table and I refused it. She said, but it says it's healthy. And I was like, that's not healthy. That's seed oil. And she doesn't know what seed oil is, but the label says it's heart healthy because it's vegetable oil. And that's what they're allowed to claim because of what they've pushed through. She had real butter in the fridge, but she had heard that that wasn't healthy.
And she probably thought because you're the healthy one, you would like that better.
She probably bought it for me.
That's so funny. I went to a restaurant, to an Ocean Prime, with a friend of mine. You know David Allred? You may know Dry Farm Wines, David. But
I've
anyways,
heard of him. Yeah,
we went to Ocean Prime for dinner a couple weeks ago, and I ordered a salad, and I said, "But can you tell me what's in the dressing? Because it's some weird house name." You know, oh, I'm like, I don't do seed oils. Like, I want to make sure that's not there. And he came out later. They brought the salad, and I was like, but you never told me what was in the dressing, so I'm not eating the salad until you tell me what's here. And he says to me, oh, we don't put seed oils in anything here. We're seed oil free. And I'm like, really? Like, that's actually really impressive. I'm so happy to hear that. And he's like, and then he continued, and I was like, okay, thank you. I really appreciate you telling me that. Fortunately, he continued, and he said, it's all made with canola oil. And I looked at him like, what? And he's like, well, canola oil is not seed oil. That's made from corn. And I went, canola oil is literally made from rapeseed. Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, and he just stopped. And I'm like, what? And I immediately, and what I had told him going in, I was like, I have an allergy towards seed oils. And it's like, and you sold me that nothing was here. Like, I'm not really allergic to seed oils, but it's the easiest way to get the chef to engage. And I was like, man, like, there's people just don't know.
Yeah.
And they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And it's like, this journey is like death by 1,000 paper cuts, trying to like, well, are you sleeping? Are you eating McDonald's? Are you this? And it's like, I've got a friend of mine who's probably 350 pounds, you know, and she'll sit and tell you that people don't understand, you know, what having an underactive thyroid is like. And I'm like, no, but I just watched you polish off an entire platter of fried food, you know, with a Coke. And it's like, and I'm not judging you based on it because you get to choose your own adventure. Mm-hmm. But when the red pill shows up and they start to want to know things, it's overwhelming. It's like they break out of the matrix, and it's like, and then all of a sudden, my best friend is an OR nurse. And we had dinner when I was in town a couple of months ago, and he's like, bro, like, I got to ask you. And he's like, he's diehard medical. He's been a nurse in the OR for 30 years. And it's medicine, right? Like, this is it. He's training. And he finally goes, all right, I give up. And he goes, you know, I don't, this is what's going on. What do you recommend? And I'm like, that's hilarious to me that you work in a hospital. You're a nurse practitioner. You are literally the head of the department where you work at a hospital, at a prestigious hospital, and we're over dinner and you're asking me medical advice. And I was like, good.
Yeah,
and he's like,
about time.
And he's like, I trust you. And it's like, and we start having a meaningful conversation because he's just like, I can't seem to crack. I need to lose some weight. I can't seem to do this, you know, blah, blah, blah. And he started getting into like some megalotide injections and all this other kind of stuff. And he's like, and I'm like, because da, 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 da. And I start going through stuff and he's just like, wow. And he's like, how do you know this? I'm like, because it's a journey. Like it's a journey. Like everyone, you're going to have to go on it. Find a guide, you know, get yourself a Gandalf. Like,
get yourself a Gandalf.
Get yourself a Gandalf, because the journey to Mordor is not going to be done by yourself. Like, and I think that's true of everybody in this space. Like, if you want to get healthy, like find a partner who's going to be a few steps ahead of you to help you on that way. Because part of it, I think it gets discouraging for people.
I have a website called rootcausedatabase.com that
Oh, I love that.
runs through daily routines, the chemicals you're exposed to in those routines, and substitutes that you can find on Amazon for the products that have these chemicals.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And then it links the chemicals and the health
That's
conditions back and forth. Rootcausedatabase.com.
Rootcausedatabase.com. I didn't even know that existed. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well,
I
Sandy,
built it with AI.
that's amazing, even better. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Sandy Martin, and we are thrilled that she's been able to join us. Please go check out her book, Biohacking Starts With No.com. Available on Amazon?
It is.
Available on Amazon. Is it, well, by the time this publishes, the paperbacks will be available.
Is available now.
Oh, it's available now. Perfect. So available now, Biohacking Starts With No. Figure out how to get to rootcausedatabase.com also. And find out. You'll learn about, everything from cleaning supplies to deodorants to
all of it,
anything that you get exposed to in your home, and you would be shocked. I just heard recently seed oils make up, they say statistically, seed oils make up 20% of the calories that an American intakes in a day. I'm like, how in the world is 20% of the calories coming from a seed oil? And most people have no idea what that even is.
right?
Like, we're just consuming it ignorantly and not realizing it. The same way that we're spraying cologne and we're using Windex and we're doing all of these things, chemical-based things that we expose ourselves to. And I'm going to tell you, seed oils, the hardest thing for me with seed oils is not food. It was actually like, I'm a person, I like going and getting a massage. And it was realizing that all of the lotions and oils and stuff that massage therapists use are normally sunflower seed based.
Oh.
So literally you're just rubbing it all over the largest organ of your body and absorbing it. And I'll tell you who actually put me onto that was, them, Randy and Rob, Happy Healthy Guys.
No.
They're, Randy Johns and Rob Vasquez, because they do a full seed oil detox weight loss program. And one of the things that they point out is that, sure, you can clean up your diet and all this other kind of stuff, but you cannot use lotions or oils or anything on your skin, and pay attention to your soaps, your shampoos, and everything, because they all have this oil base to them, because the oil actually helps the cohesion of the product so that it keeps its form factor. And I was like, what in the name of all things holy? And I started turning over every bottle in my house. I'm like, holy smokes, like literally just every oil, everything. And it's so funny because I went and got a massage last week, and I took a bottle of avocado oil, not like grocery store stuff, but like I bought a bottle of massage oil. I'm like, I'm taking it with me to the appointment. I'm like, can you use this? Like, this is avocado based. And it's like, and the therapist was like, sure. Like, I suppose we can do that. And I was like, I have an allergy to a lot of stuff. Like, if you could please just, whatever, crazy as that is. But guys, there's so much stuff. Go to, help me again with the name, the rootcausedatabase.com. Look at the list of things that you're actually exposing yourselves to. I think you'll be shocked. Check out biohackingstartswithno.com. Everything's in the show notes. Sandy, we just appreciate you being here with us today
Thanks for
and
having
sharing
me.
your experience. That's very vulnerable for you to share this experience you had. And I'm glad that you're actually taking your pain, turning it into your purpose, and then we all get to benefit from it.
Thank you.
Thank you.